As we come ever closer to the end of session here in just 3 weeks, the clock is ticking to try to pass a budget. This week was eventful in an uneventful way. The House Democrats thought that the Republican majority was going to roll out a package of about $300 million worth of tax increases on middle-class families, raising their price to get to work by increasing gasoline taxes, as well as raising taxes on middle-income and low-income folks who smoke cigarettes. But when our caucus came together and stood unified behind raising taxes on middle-class families while the wealthy and most powerful in the state got off scot-free, a funny thing happened. Bipartisanship happened in this building because we learned that there were dozens of House Republicans in the majority caucus who stood with us and agreed and told leadership that they didn't want to vote for a tax increase on gasoline and cigarettes without talking about something like gross production taxes. And so when the pressure was applied to the Speaker of the House and the floor leader, House Republicans said, if the House, those dozens of House Republicans said, we're going to stand with the House Democrats and oppose that bill, don't put it up for a vote. And so therefore this week, if anything happened, it was a good week for middle-class families. The tax increase that looked impending and looked ever more likely that could be passed on to them failed without even a vote, because middle-class families contacted their elected officials and told them, not today. Don't raise taxes on us without raising the gross production taxes or restoring income taxes for wealthy folks who benefited under those tax cuts over the last decade. So as we sit here today, we know compromise is a word that oftentimes gets kicked around in this building, but our caucus is still prepared to compromise. About 8 weeks ago, we rolled out our Restoring Oklahoma plan, which is a solution to the problems the state faces, and it was a solution that shared the burden of funding state government like education, healthcare, public safety, and transportation. It didn't put the burden all on the backs of middle-class families. It restored income tax cuts for wealthy folks. It restored gross production tax cuts for oil and gas industry folks. It would include the cigarette tax and a variety of other measures that shared the burden as part of an overall solution to fund the state and to find a way to pay for increased teacher salaries and state employee salaries. To date, a few of those proposals, whether it was combined corporate reporting and a few other things, eliminating the vendor discount, have been offered up by the Republicans, and we appreciate them working with us to raise some revenue to close this budget hole. We have a long way to go. Make no mistake about it. The key that unlocks the budget box this year is the gross production tax. If we don't find a way to bring in increased revenue through the gross production tax in this state, we're looking at significant budget cuts for things that we care about. And when the Speaker of the House says that all options are on the table, then we want him to be a man of his word and put the gross production tax up for a vote. If he doesn't, then the people of Oklahoma are looking at dramatic budget cuts to things that we care about, and they're looking at it for one reason, because the Republican majority refused to raise taxes on the oil and gas industry, the most powerful industry in the history of the world. Now, we are cautiously optimistic. Since the gas tax looks like a non-starter at this point, we are working with Chairwoman Osborne and the Appropriations Chairman in the House to try to find a way to find common ground around a gross production tax. And as we sit here today, if somebody were to ask me what I think the prospects are of some sort of compromise on the gross production tax, I'd say they are better today than they were yesterday. And so there is some hope and optimism on the horizon. And I think that if we are going to get it done, we've got about 10 days, really less than that. We've probably got about 7 or 8 legislative days left in order to find that compromise so that we can get an idea, a good picture of how much revenue we're going to have for the budget, so then they can turn around and actually negotiate how the money is going to be spent. And so what I'm asking the public who may be watching this now on the internet or maybe watching it on the news tonight to do is contact your Republican state senators and your Republican state representatives and tell them to put gross production tax up for a vote. If they will do that, our caucus will support it. We'll support the cigarette tax, and we'll go a long way to closing this $900 million budget hole and helping to support core services in the state of Oklahoma. We've said all along that it will take at least 51 votes to pass the gross production tax increase. Our caucus has 26 that will vote for it. I believe firmly that there are at least 25 members of the House Republican caucus that would vote to support it, and so I don't see failure on the House floor as an even a possibility. So we've said all along that we're trying to get it to a 5% increase, to go from 2% to 5%. That would bring in a little over $300 million. I know the Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association likes to kick me around. They called me a smooth talker with bad numbers. Let me go ahead and lay it out for my friend Chad Warmington, and he is my friend. With each percentage increase in the gross production tax, you can look at bringing in between $120 to $130 million. What Chad's talking about when he says it won't bring in any money is he's saying, well, let's start a new gross production tax increase on all new wells starting July 1. Make no mistake about it, our plan and the plan that we're negotiating with the Appropriations Chairwoman says that any well within that first 3-year window that's currently grandfathered in at 2%, they would pay the new rate. So if we go to 5%, it would be 5% on all wells 3 years and younger, and then it would go north to 7% from there. That's how we get the $325 to $350 million that we need to help balance the budget. Our Restoring Oklahoma plan, that was the solution that shared the burden across all citizens across the state of Oklahoma, would bring in about $1.4 billion. If you were to go to 5% on gross production taxes, that's about $350 million. The cigarette tax brings in another $180 million. If you go and do the itemized deduction, which we're still negotiating around capping the itemized deduction or tweaking how that's worked, that could bring in an additional $100 million. There was some out-of-state tax collection changes that were made that brought in $10 to $15 million. There's some other ways that you can get there, get close to $800 to $900 million through some smaller revenue-raising measures. But the big chunk, where you get the majority of the money to help balance this budget, comes from the gross production taxes. And the great thing about it is it comes from an industry that can afford to pay it. The same oil and gas industry that are paying 2% in Oklahoma today are paying 8 to 9% in Texas and New Mexico, paying 10 to 11% in North Dakota. They can afford to pay it, and our citizens cannot afford for them not to. We've said that if the Republicans want to finish closing the hole, they can do so by restoring some of the income tax cuts on high earners. If they were to go from 5 to 6% on families that make over $200,000 a year, and then from 5 to 7% on families that make over $400,000 a year, that would bring in about $208 million next year. And so that would be all that they would need. You could do the income tax on high earners, doing the gross production tax, doing the cigarette tax, and doing a variety of these other smaller measures, and we can close the hole, not have any further cuts to education, healthcare, and public safety, and move. And the great thing about it is not only do you close the hole, but you also close the hole with recurring revenue, so that as the economy grows, the state gets better and benefits from those income taxes, gross production taxes, and other revenue sources. My caucus has been frustrated with Governor Fallin because we've been waiting for leadership. We applauded her. You can go back and look at the tape. The first week of session, I gave the governor kudos for recognizing we have a revenue problem and offering up about $900 million worth of potential revenue. We didn't like her sources coming on the backs of middle-class families with doctor's visits and haircuts and things like that. We didn't think that was appropriate, but we applauded her for taking a leadership role and trying to find some revenue. But once week one, matter of fact, once day one had come and gone on that budget, she knew the House and Senate Republicans didn't support it, neither did the House or Senate Democrats. And so it was incumbent upon her to continue in that leadership role and offer up other ideas. Make no mistake about it, our caucus, every time that we offer an idea and the Republicans come and counter, we're in negotiations. We're saying, well, we'll take something else and trying to find a way to compromise. The governor has simply said nothing. She had a 15-minute press conference yesterday, and I've yet to find out where in that press conference she actually offered up any solutions. She did a nice job of detailing we had $878 million, and with some crude graphics. To be honest with you, the hole is even bigger. It's about $1 billion hole now, so the governor's numbers then weren't even accurate. She did a nice job of saying how bad things are. She did a nice job of blaming other people. Mind you, she didn't talk about the fact that she signed the gross production tax cuts. She signed the most recent income tax cuts. She signed the tax credits and exemptions that helped bankrupt the state. She never took responsibility for it, but she tried to cast blame on everybody else. Well, make no mistake about it. I hope the governor's watching. If she's not, I hope she hears this. Governor, we're waiting for your ideas. We've offered cigarette tax, gross production taxes, income tax revenues, itemized deduction revenues. You go down the list, we've offered it up. What's the governor willing to accept? If she would step up to the plate and show some leadership, tell the legislatures, tell the citizens of this state what she's willing to support, then that would go a long way in helping us to force the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans to do the right thing. If she would put her weight behind a gross production tax revenue increase, I think we could get this deal done. But right now, she's hiding behind throwing rocks and finger pointing at other folks, refusing to actually take responsibility for it. If these programs like healthcare, public safety, and education continue to struggle financially, there's one reason for it. It's the Republican policies that have been implemented over the last decade of trying to cut their way to prosperity, slashing revenues, refusing to bring our federal dollars home, that have caused rural hospitals to file for bankruptcy, that caused hundreds of thousands of our citizens to be without any health care coverage. If they want to turn around and blame us, as we've offered up $1.4 billion worth of a solution that shares the burden of funding state government, if they want to blame us for the mess that they've created, I think the citizens of Oklahoma are much smarter than that. We hear a lot of finger pointing between the Senate and House Republican caucuses, saying that one group says we would do the gross production taxes, but the Senate Republicans won't, or vice versa. That kind of finger pointing doesn't get us anywhere. I've been negotiating with Leslie Osborne. I think she's been negotiating in good faith. We don't agree on everything, but I think her heart's in the right place, and she's trying to accomplish something that is important to try to balance the budget without hurting more of our citizens. But to date, I've yet to see the Speaker of the House or the Pro Tem of the Senate actually step up and say what they would support. I know what Leslie says she would support, but when she's offered up, when she had a press conference last week standing with oil and gas executives offering to increase the gross production tax, the Speaker of the House didn't agree with her, refused to stand by her. I've met with the Pro Tem of the Senate a couple of times in passing and asked if he would come out in favor of gross production tax, and he said, well, we're going to do a gas tax. And I said, the gas tax won't pass, Mr. President, unless you do something around gross production or around income taxes, and he doesn't want to do those. And so what we find is our caucus continues to offer up a solution that shares the burden. We're offering up compromise positions to balance the budget. We're willing to vote for things we don't like in order to get things that we do. To date, the Senate and House Republican leadership continues to offer up things that they like, but refuse to accept things that we do. And at the end of the day, our position, the things that we're supporting, things like gross production tax increases, they have broad bipartisan support in this legislature and within the state of Oklahoma. It's time to get there. The only people standing in the way of a balanced budget right now are the Speaker and the Pro Tem of the Senate. If they would come out tomorrow and say that they support a gross production tax increase, we would go a long way to getting this thing wrapped up by the end of May. I do think there will be a budget passed. I think a lot of times in this building you've got grown adults who act like 19-year-old college students that wait till the very last minute to cram for their final exam. I think that's where we are. I think while Leslie Osborne has been working very diligently to try to find revenue sources, continuing to float trial balloons within her caucus that, from what I hear, keep getting shot down. Will they support this revenue? No. Will you support that revenue? No. I think what's happening is Leslie's basically trying to wait them out. I think when the realization comes that we're 3 weeks away from the end of session and we don't have a budget, I think a lot of those House Republican members will say, okay, what do I need to do to get ready for my final exam? And they'll start to accept revenue sources. I think that's what has happened in the past. That's how compromise usually ends up happening in this building, is not because they want to work, it's because the clock forces them to do that. I find it interesting when folks try to make it look as if we weren't the ones trying to compromise. They came to us and said, we want a gas tax, or excuse me, we want a cigarette tax. And I said, okay, we'll do that if you compromise with us, if you bring our federal dollars home for Medicaid to cover our citizens. They said no. We said we were willing to do it. We said we will do both of these things. Their position was always, we're only going to do one. We're only going to do what we want to do. We're only going to do a cigarette tax. They refused to compromise. Here we are again. We said we'll do the cigarette tax if you do gross production. They said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to raise taxes on middle-class families by raising gas taxes. That's not negotiating. That's saying take it or leave it, my way or the highway. Our caucus has continued to negotiate around a shared solution that will take care of the state of Oklahoma without hurting middle-class families. Their caucus continues to offer up bad plans that raise taxes on middle-class families, and they never try to compromise with it. It's always a take it or leave it. But make no mistake about it, they have to have our votes to increase taxes in this state, and if they're going to get them, by God, they're not going to get them by raising taxes on middle-class families.